Okay, so we're back. So here are the answers that we just finished the last part of the lecture from. And now I'm going to move on to some of the problems with the consumer price index. So you'll see the first problem is what's called substitution bias, and that we don't factor towards things that we substitute for. People spend a lot less on clothing than they did 100 years ago. We spend a lot less on food than we did 100 years ago. 100 years ago, we didn't have cell phones. 100 years ago, we didn't consume as much medicine, things of that nature. So it uses a fixed basket of goods. Now, every now and then, the people who do the CPI will change what's in the basket of goods, but they try to avoid doing it too often because they want to be comparing apples to apples, so to speak. They want to be comparing the same basket of goods over time. So that's one of the problems with the consumer price index. Another, as I said before, is the introduction of new goods. When there's new goods, you have more options. There's more products, and my phone is ringing, so I'm going to pause this. Okay, so as new goods are introduced, there's more options. Your dollars become more valuable. They become scarcer. And so by using a fixed basket of goods, it's overstating the cost of living. So that's a problem with CPI. Another problem with CPI is the unmeasured quality change. When quality goes up, computers now are much better than they were even 3 years ago, and that improvement in quality doesn't get measured. Okay, so if computers become better but the price is the same, the CPI will stay the same, but the quality of life will improve. Okay, so all of these problems overstate the cost of living increases. Okay, another way of saying that is it understates the increase of quality of life. So the Bureau of Labor and Statistics does things to try to fix this, but it still probably overstates inflation by a little bit each year as a result of this. But as you can see, by these two measures of inflation, consumer price index and GDP deflator, they move very closely together. Usually, the CPI is a little more extreme that you'll see in peaks, places like here and here, than GDP deflator. Neither is a perfect measure of inflation, but in general, they're the best that we have. So here are a couple of comparisons and contrasters for CPI and GDP deflator. The biggest one, in my opinion, is just capital goods is not in CPI. All it is consumption. Okay, so take out a piece of paper. We'll do some problems here. What's going to happen to CPI and to the GDP deflator if Starbucks increases their prices on Frappuccinos? If Caterpillar raises their price on tractors? And if Armani, something that is an import to the U.S., is raising the price of its Italian jeans that Hong Yil wears? So answer those, and when we return from break, we will take a look and see if we got them right. Okay, welcome back. Here are the answers to the questions you just did. So as you can see, purchasing Frappuccinos affects both the consumer price index and GDP. When Caterpillar raises the price of industrial tractors, which is a investment component, the GDP deflator rises, but the CPI does not. And when Armani rises the price of Italian jeans, the consumer price index rises, but the GDP deflator does not. So there's some of the important differences. Okay, so here's kind of some historical figures that look at what happens over the dollar. This is as we joked about in class. The folks who have been around longer will tell you all sorts of things about what a dollar would buy you back in their day. And you can even look at the minimum wage. I'll also throw in the minimum wage. When I entered the workforce in 1986 was $3.30 an hour. And I think today it's $7.25, if I recall correctly, in 2012. Okay, so now the question it's asking is, does minimum wage have more purchasing power in 64 or in 2007? So to do that, we need to use the Consumer Price Index. And here you can see what it looks like in today's dollars. So you take the price level from today and the price level in the base year, and then you take the amount of dollars in the base year. Notice that this is the base year right here. Okay, so here they do the example. Okay, and they do the calculation. Look at the CPI in each of those years, and you'll see that the minimum wage in 1964 was worth $7.78 in 2007 dollars. So what that means is the QOL, quality of life, or how much you got for minimum wage, was actually better in 1964 than it was in 2007. So even though somebody was making more money at minimum wage in 2007, that money was actually worth more in 1964. So go on to the next slide. Okay, so we're always trying to look at the value of dollars over time. Okay, and they can see how the value of dollars changes over time and corrects for inflation. Okay, so here is what's happened in the value of dollars per hour in 2007 dollars. So what this chart is essentially telling you is it's showing you the value of minimum wage. Okay, and that's why they meet right here. They're doing it in 2007 dollars. Okay, so even though this has gradually gone up, and you'll see it's the reason it progresses like this is because people, they try to hold off in raising minimum wage and hold off in raising minimum wage, and they only like to do it every couple of years. But as you'll see, it's kind of fluctuated. But by the same token, if its range has been from here, okay, to about here, it's always been about the same. It's been somewhere between about $6 and $9. And I know that sounds like a wide range, but it really isn't when you think about it, if you look at the actual value of what it gets. Okay, so now it wants you to do a problem asking you to convert education in the late 80s to education today using the Consumer Price Index. Okay, so I'm going to pause this right now so you can do the calculation. Let's take out a piece of paper, go back a couple of slides, and see if you can figure out how to do this calculation. Okay, we're back, and here is the answer. So as you will see, even after correcting for inflation, the price of college has gone way up. Okay, so it's a pretty simple equation. You take the CPI, the current CPI, and you put that over the base year CPI, and you multiply by the year you're looking for. Okay, so as you can see, 2629 is far greater. So it's answering what we already knew, which is college is becoming more and more expensive, and that's even truer of boarding schools. Okay. Here's a word you don't see a lot, but indexation. Okay, that's something that's corrected for inflation. Anytime you hear GDP numbers or CPI numbers in the news, on the 6 o'clock news and the national news, that's already adjusted for inflation by indexation. Okay, so we're always comparing apples to apples. Okay, interest rates are not corrected for inflation. So once again, to come up with a real interest rate will correct for inflation. Okay, so you'll take the interest rate and you will subtract inflation, and that will get you the real interest rate. Okay, and that's going to become more important a few chapters down the road, but they just want to touch on it now. Here's an example. Okay, so you're depositing $1,000 and you're getting 9%. What the question is asking is, what is that 9% really worth? Okay, so after 1 year, you're going to have $1,090 after loaning your money for a year. Okay, but it's not going to be worth the $90. What you profit is not going to be worth the $90 that you had at the beginning of the year. It's actually only going to be worth $55 because of inflation. Okay, because inflation is 3.5%. Okay, it still appears to be a good investment, but it's not as good as the 9% that you're originally looking at it with. Okay, and this shows us the nominal and the real interest rate over time. And this one is quite interesting because when you see the biggest spikes in nominal interest rate is when the real interest rate is actually being dragged downward some. And that was what was happening in here, in this window here, was a period of, I wouldn't call it hyperinflation, but the greatest inflation that I've seen in my lifetime. I wasn't really seeing it because I was about 8 years old, but I know about it. So in periods of high inflation, you'll see these large gaps. Okay, and it usually comes after a period of great prosperity. Okay, and here is the last bit of information for this chapter, a little review. And thank you, and have a wonderful evening.